And I'm very, very pleased to have two people who have, from a different point of view, who can talk about this issue, which was the relationship between, biotech and pharma, which has changed over time, and it continues to change, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do this as a fireside chat. I'm going to take, as explained to our two panelists here, I'm going to take a minute or two and just do a real short history of how the relationship between biotech and pharma has changed over time, and then we're just going to have a conversation. So when you think about it, biotech didn't exist until a certain point in time. It's actually relatively new. And when it first came out, they didn't have sales forces, right? They didn't have, they didn't necessarily have teams of people who were good at clinical trials, et cetera. They were mainly good at inventing, right? And so their relationship with big pharma was very much a reflection on the pieces they didn't know how to do, right? So there was a very heavy dependence on big pharma to not only the sales force part, right, but also to do the clinical trials, et cetera, right? Because that's what big pharma, they have people that do that. So the early stages, that was a biotech would invent, and then they sometimes convinced or didn't convince the big pharma to help them, to actually do clinical trials and to sell. But over time, things changed. One is the biotechs had more and more choices for other people that they could pay to do the clinical trials and the sorting, but also eventually things like orphan drugs. If it's an orphan drug and there are 3 research centers, you don't need to partner with Pfizer to use Pfizer sales force. So the relationship changed, including the fact that biotech could raise lots of money and made a lot, at very high valuations. So they could put off when they had to either sell or license support. Then it continues to change even more. And so, as you just keep going, it keeps evolving. So today, depending upon what the biotech company is, what they're developing, who the customers are, distribution, so forth, and their expertise in clinical trials, their relationship with big pharma can be quite different, right? So with that, I'm going to start out and say to each, first of all, I'd like each of them just to take a few minutes and introduce themselves, so I won't mangle it, right? And Sandy, let me start with you, and then Michael, if you could talk.
Great, thank you. Well, I'll introduce myself by saying I'm very good friends with Joe. So that's it. My legitimacy in the room. I don't agree with everything she said, but I am very good friends with her. Still.
By the way, I invited him to be a speaker, not knowing that he's friends with Najee.
In fact, it's the only real reason I'm here.
Oh, I know.
We have no conflict, no interest. But just on the AI thing for a minute, I'm involved in a company that's involved in data, biobank data, drug development using machine learning. And no one knows what AI means. Everyone uses the word. But tell me if I would challenge anyone here to give me 2 sentences that they could say quickly. What is it? I don't even know what it is. It's a black box. And the other piece is there's been a lot of failures in the space. People barely, trial spark, all these people, we're going to make the world better with AI, spend a ton of money, and things haven't worked. That doesn't mean it won't work, but Fred, that's a bit of the reason for the skepticism, I think, about why people aren't adopting it. They don't know really what it means, and they're scared of it. It also is like manufacturing business. All of a sudden, automation takes away jobs. It may be better cars, but there's a lot of people that are out of work. And in big pharma, especially, come on, we know that you can't even bring them a program that might threaten their budget, no less new technology, right? So, and I'm only saying this because I'll now introduce myself. My name is Sandy Zweifach. I was a scientist turned businessman who got back into the business of science 32 years ago. I've seen it both from the pharma side, the biotech side, the banking side, the VC side. So I've sat around the table, and I do have, without being arrogant, a perspective on each person's view because I've seen it, I've experienced it, I've tried to do deals with J&J and been shut down by commercial. Right, commercial runs the roost in most of these markets. At the end of the day, you don't have a commercially viable product. Commercial says, yeah, great science, sorry, my prediction is that we're gonna make enough money, trade. Or I bring them new label ideas with AI, with data. Hey, we could do a label expansion. There's no way I don't know what the label expansion ideas are. Thank you very much. We have a really good commercial. Okay, so that's really what we're up against in general. And that's what we're up against in the biotech industry when we talk to pharma. And people need to understand that that's the joke. But anyway, long way of saying who I am, what I do. I currently am the president and chief business officer of a company based in Barcelona that does developing autoimmune disease drugs, and I sit on a bunch of boards in the industry.
Yeah, glad to be here, and I don't want to go into my AI spiel, but that's more personal. Actually, I think I'm going to try your, I don't know what your thing to my way. See if she's on. And also, I cover everything. I work for, my name's Christel. I work for my parent company is MGH Life Sciences. I work on 3 brands that they own: Pharmaceutical Executive, which the Peter's been a trusted EAB member for many years now, and a great support for us. Also, Life Clinical Trials, another magazine, digital magazine as well that I work on in the R&D space, and Pharmaceutical Compass. So ChatGPT to me personally is, I want to steal my job in 3 years. There's a lot being talked about with content generation. Even our companies looking at, which is good, our companies looking at different ways to leverage AI, generative and ChatGPT for our content, things like that. So we're closely focused on that. But then of course covering it quite a bit as well, just all the changes, and kind of like you were saying, Sandy, we're looking for. We get inundated with pitches and stuff regarding AI, whether it's drug development, whether it's commercialization, things like that nature. And they're all great and interesting. But I think kind of what we're looking for now is just some use cases of how AI is being applied successfully in the industry. So.
So, Fred, you didn't know we were just an extension of your panel, right? Yeah, in fact, we're going to relate to this. This is no longer the relationship between biotech and pharma. It's AI part 2, right? It's like movies. It's like a sequel, right?
And they're always the more successful.
Yeah, that's right. It's AI this time it's personal, right? So this issue about the relationship to biotech and pharma is a little complicated, right? And it does depend a lot on what therapeutic area, what kind of technology that you're developing, and so forth. But let's start with just generally, how would you characterize the relationship between biotechs and pharmas today, in general, big picture? And then I want to drill down into whether there are differences as you get to different parts of the drug industry. Any comments on that?
Schizophrenic.
Okay.
I say schizophrenia is the #1 word when it comes to the relationship, because pharma is always changing. They change their therapeutic area focus. They change their budgets. They change what is new and hot. And so 6 months ago, you could have gone to J&J or to Jensen or Lilly and bring them something and be like, we have no interest in this whatsoever. 6 months later, oh my God, how come we haven't come to a building? We actually did. And you didn't like it, and you didn't think it was of interest. So, I mean, it really, I'm not joking. I mean, I know it sounds like I'm just being a comedian, which I sort of am, but in general, yes, my wife, she thinks I'm a big joke, but seriously, I think that is something that everyone involved in biotech needs to understand. If there's no interest today, that doesn't mean there won't be interest tomorrow. You need to have the capital to sustain yourself, you need to have the data. Some days, earlier than phase 2, won't look at it. Some days, oh, you have a platform? Love platforms. Next week, platforms? We don't look at platforms. I mean, it's sort of, you have to be a marathon player. You have to have the ability to sustain yourself. You have to have the ability to have conviction, but you also need to be reactive, like what's happening in the market, right? You know, CNS was a dead area years ago. Nobody was investing in CNS. Now, CNS, hot area, autoimmune, I'm in it, thank God. It's super hot, but super challenging. A lot of companies now in autoimmune. So how do you differentiate yourself? But the relationship is, at the end of the day, you need pharma to ultimately market your drug. That's your ultimate, and especially now with the IPO market not being robust, that's your exit. That's your future. When the IPO market was crazy, people didn't talk to pharma. They were like, I don't need pharma. They're not going to value me. I'm not going to have liquidity, right? So it's an ever evolving relationship. There is nothing that I could say today. Take this statement to the bank about the relationship. That's what I could say.
So you gotta be very, so you're saying, you gotta be very resilient and realize the big pharma keeps changing opinions, so you gotta, you know, be persistent and then figure out what angle will ultimately connect you to.
Well, I think you have to first believe in your own science.
Yeah.
Right? You have to believe in your own science. You have to have conviction. Obviously, then you need to attract capital. I'm saying all the obvious things because that's all I know to say. And then after that, I think you need to read the market a little bit. You know, you're not going into septic shock, right? I mean, so you know, unless you're crazy. But you know, are you going into autoimmune today? Are you going into CNS? You're not going into cardiovascular. I mean, boy, you guys are a really big bet, right? But again, if you have a cardiovascular molecule that you think is going to be a winner, convince somebody and get the conviction. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. It's, I mean, we're kind of busy following just the different dynamics, you know, over the years. It's changed, you know, how the pharma's relationship to biotech. It's constantly changing. You know, especially the last 3 years with the IPO market, the valuation markets skewing the, you know, towards pharma, obviously. So that you hear about all the capital the pharma has to do all those, make all these deals. And for a while, they were sort of just sitting on this capital. So then we start to think, what can biotechs do to differentiate? You know, what should we be looking to cover that appeals to these pharma companies to make more money? Now, is it like Sandy's saying, going into different therapeutic areas, really latching on to the next gen therapies and all that stuff? Is it, you know, I mean, maybe you can answer this. Is this something that the biotechs need to do, you know, within, as far as just changing their models, their business model, and tapping into it's more targeted, not just tapping into these new trends? Or if they're innovative, if they're good at the science, can they draw on the models of years ago?
Yeah, I think in part, if I combine what the two of you are saying is, it's really, really important to have a thoughtful strategy and be able to pivot. And because the answer may be quite different depending upon where you are. But I think where Sandy is, you gotta believe in your science, you gotta believe you're solving a problem, et cetera. So if you don't believe that, then it doesn't matter what your relationship is. But it doesn't always end up with a relationship with Big Pharma. We have someone here in the audience, Evan Lowe, who is the CEO of Paratech. And, you know, we work together, and it's safe to say, you know, he figured out long before that they developed a series of new antibiotics, which is like the death valley of, right? Because the problem, antibiotics is one, they actually cure you. And so it's not like a statin where you're on the prescription forever. But the other is, you know, bacteria develop resistance. So it becomes like the third rail, right, in the drug industry. So raising money, but more importantly, you know, just realizing that it's not the end game is not to be a big pharma to buy you out, right? So it is possible, there are a lot of different strategies, but you have to look at what game you're in, right? And what the circumstances are, and then choose, but it may not be in the end game of, tying up with a big pharma, right?
No, I mean, the only thing I will say is, the other mistake I think that biotechs make is, they look at a handful of, I'm not a sports guy per se, but LeBron James is in the field. And they say, oh man, they raised 100 million, I'm gonna go raise 100. Well, Mark McKenna raised 400 million for his latest company because he made $11 billion for his recent investment. I asked a bunch of the guys, I'm friends with all these people, why do you put money in that? I gave him some crumbs. I made $4 billion off of him. Here, gave him 100 million. It was nothing to me. But let him see if he can do it again. But did you make that money? No. Well, you're gonna have a harder time raising that kind of capital. So I think a big mistake in biotech in general is not really being self-aware of what your value is, total package to the marketplace, the science, your people, the opportunity set. Well, I will say where I do believe AI can be helpful to biotech if used appropriately. I think biotech needs to start thinking about being more efficient. It's just, I think they're not that efficient at the end of the day. I think they sometimes get overloaded very quickly, then all of a sudden you see how quickly they have to downsize. I think AI, if used correctly, can help in the efficiency of capital.
Yeah, I mean, there are some examples that we've actually kind of explored about, like Peter's saying, biotech not always just say, looking to big pharma, and actually having some inventive sort of pursuits. So, yeah, one I found pretty interesting was GenMab. I did a interview profile with their CEO, Don Van de Winkle. And they've had an interesting model over the years. They've been a royalty. They've sold off the royalty. They're a long, 25-year biotech, and their model has always kind of been royalty driven. They have licensed their drugs. But lately they've sort of changed their model, and they're getting into the M&A game. So they're acquiring smaller, tech-driven focused biotechs in a way. And they just acquired Profen Bio, ADC, antibody drug conjugate specialist. So that's a hot area. So they're thinking it's okay. We're going to add some assets from these targeted areas that are hot right now. So that they're not looking at they did license. They've had licensed drugs to big pharma, but they're big. They're throwing their eggs into this. Okay, we can be commercial too, and so you're seeing some of that transformation now. I know they're a bigger sort of biotech, but it's an interesting sort of model.
I really like, Sandy, what you said about being creative about how you design a company, your spend rate. I'm going to give you an example that's a really good example of what you said, because you're saying, be careful about building up all this overhead and officers and so forth, whatever. We're doing the financing for one company, and the competing company, it just got all sort of, hired people too early, expensive, all so forth, but then had a delay at the FDA, so that now they got to have 2 years on and just burning cash, right? But let me tell you about an extreme example of a company I knew. Sandy, you'll love this story. There was a company called Allopex Therapeutics. They were in Boston, and they were funded with a small amount by the Pritzker family. And I knew the Pritzker family. They said, please go see the CEO, right? So I arranged to the CEO. I said, where are your offices? He gave me an address. I pull up in front of a house, right? And I knock on the door. It's his house. So he said, oh, come into my office. So we go to his kitchen, right? And we go to his kitchen. So I said, he talked about it. They had developed a drug there was a Harvard researcher who developed a drug. He was the CEO. They outsourced everything. And then as soon as they could, they develop a partnership with Sanofi for the drug. And they designed it so that essentially Sanofi did the clinical trials and then the sales force designed it to create a tremendous incentive for Sanofi to buy them out.
Yeah.
He never hired. I think he had a bookkeeper from some place he found in Staples or something like that. And then at the end of the day, the milestones and the royalties, every time it came in, they just went out to the shareholders. And in the end, Sanofi bought them out and they gave all the money to shareholders, no IPO, nothing. And that was that, but they didn't. He said, I'm not even gonna bother hiring all these people and burning up cash, right? And he never raised, beyond the seed money for the Pritzkers, didn't raise a dime, right, from venture capital and so forth. So now that's an extreme, but it's a great example of what you were saying, Sandy, which is think out of the box, right? Don't think conventionally and don't think of your relationship with the M&A market or IPO market or the big pharma in the conventional way. Is that a good example of what you said?
Yeah, I would say as a former investor, if I visited your facility and you had a fountain, I was shorting your stock. And I was like, all right, what are you spending?
Yeah.
But look, on the flip side, there's also VCs that want to see a full team, right? They want to see. It's very confusing. I mean, to be honest, it's a very confusing question. I've never seen like this is what you do and there's a formula and this is how you just have to be super attentive all the time.
Now, a question for the two of you. Are there any technology changes or structural changes in the industry that you think are gonna change the relationship of biotech to big pharma? Not across the board, but maybe in certain areas. Other than AI.
Structurally, you mean kind of like the relationship, sort of like the partnership?
No, anything. It could be industry structure, it could be the financial market, it could be anything, right?
Yeah, I mean, you see in the financial market that you know a lot of the biotech stocks are making a comeback now. We always see from a lot of the KOLs is you know relying their fundamentals, and I think with biotech, I think there is that awareness from them that you know we have those fundamentals. You know, let's keep those centered. But then on the flip side, and we're getting a lot of coverage on this too. You get the sense that biotech too is looking at the commercial end of it as well, and they know that they have to build some of their thinking into their strategy. And you know, normally that's not on their minds right away. As far as it's getting innovation accepted, it's going through access, all that stuff. But you're starting to see more about what should the playbook be for a biotech, for a startup. And obviously, you know, they don't have the same playbook as a pharma, as a big pharma company. So I think there's more focus in that. You know, how can they engage the community? How can they engage KOLs? How can they bring in expertise? How can they tap partners? Not necessarily big pharma, but tap experts in commercial market access and all that to get that sort of to get that knowledge earlier, and so if that's if that's kind of a structural difference, maybe pharma is seeing that, and maybe that helps sort of ease some of the trust between them. They have a great asset, but also this biotech, they're doing the homework as far as using AI to help as far as what the commercial landscape will look like if we move this project forward. So I'm seeing more collaboration. We're seeing more collaboration there.
I'll give you the last word, Sandy.
I don't really need the last word, but I will say, because of AI, everybody knows what's out there now. So pharma knows, biotech. If you are biotech and you're not using AI, you probably have a blind spot. right? You probably have even just a literature search blind spot. Literature searches can be done as fast as your chat. Right then. And if you're not using at the minimum that tool, you go to Pharma, they're like, wait, did you know about this paper that says this thing is never gonna work? And then you're done.
Yeah.
Right, so I do believe there are a lot of good uses for AI. I think the drug development, patient stratification piece is promising, but to be proven.